I'm 58 years old, and until last year I thought I understood what unconditional love meant. My husband, Gregory, passed away from cancer after 32 years of marriage. His death left a hollow in my chest so deep, I thought I'd never climb out of it. But I told myself I still had my daughter, Lauren. She was all I had left, and that had to be enough. The house Gregory and I built together in Cedar Grove was filled with too many memories. I couldn't bear to stay. So, when Lauren suggested I move in with her and her husband Zachary for a while, I said yes. It felt like the right thing. Family supports each other, right? At first, I tried to stay invisible. I kept to the small guest room in the back. I cooked dinner, cleaned up after myself, and offered to help around the house. Lauren seemed fine with it. Zach, though. Zach barely looked at me. When he did, it was like I was a stain on his kitchen tile. He rolled his eyes when I spoke. I heard him mutter freeloader under his breath. I told myself I must have misheard, but deep down, I knew. Lauren never said much. When I told her how Zach acted, she'd say he's just stressed. Work's been rough. I swallowed my pride and stayed quiet. That's what mothers do, right? Until one night changed everything. I had made chicken pot pie, Zach's favorite. We were sitting around the table, Lauren scrolling on her phone, Zach sipping his beer. Without warning, he looked up and said, "Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." The room froze. I looked at Lauren, hoping for anything. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Maybe it's best," she mumbled, "if you find something more stable, for everyone's sake." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to the room, and packed my things. 2 suitcases. That's all I had left of my life. They didn't even walk me out. I sat on the curb that night, alone, cold, and erased, and I had no idea where I'd go next. I ended up at a rundown motel off the highway. The kind with peeling wallpaper, humming vending machines, and locks that looked like they hadn't worked properly in years. I paid cash for 3 nights, then sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for hours. The silence was unbearable. Every creak felt like a memory I didn't want. Every breath felt like it cost more than I had left. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't expect her to call me either. What would she say? That I should have seen it coming? The next morning I sent her a message. Simple. I understand. I love you always. No response. Days turned to weeks. Still nothing. I tried applying for jobs, anything that didn't require lifting or standing too long. Grocery stores, diners, front desks. But at 58, with no recent work history and eyes still swollen from grief, no one wanted me. One manager called me overqualified, which I knew was code for too old, too broken. Every night I stared at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. I had given my entire life to that girl, to Gregory, to being a good wife, a good mom, and here I was forgotten. One evening, I pulled out an old box I'd grabbed in my rush to pack, mostly family photos, a few cards, a recipe book. But underneath it all, there was something I didn't remember packing, my mother's old diary. It was small, leather-bound, and worn at the edges. I hadn't seen it in years, maybe never really read it. I almost put it back, but something about the way it felt in my hands made me pause. I lit the old lamp on the nightstand and opened the first page. Her handwriting hadn't changed, still those elegant, looping letters she used when writing birthday notes or signing Christmas cards. At first, it was normal stuff. Notes about church, complaints about grocery prices, mentions of weather. Then came the entry that made my breath catch. He came again today, said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a name to protect. Evelyn must never know. I read it again, and again. Evelyn must never know. But now I did, and something deep inside me shifted. I couldn't sleep that night. The words in the diary kept echoing in my head. Evelyn must never know. But now I did, and I needed to know more. I flipped through more entries, carefully, like each word might break apart in my hands. There were more notes about the man, always just his, never a full name. But my mother wrote about secret meetings at hotels, envelopes of cash she tried to refuse, and the guilt that ate at her every time he left. Then one entry stopped me cold. He said he's made arrangements. That if anything happens to him, he's ensured Evelyn has something, a part of what he built. He promised me a letter, a trust. He said his lawyer, Mr. Marvin Goldstein, would know. That name, it hit me like a punch to the chest. Marvin Goldstein. I had heard it before. Years ago. In a conversation I barely remembered, My mother once mentioned him when talking about someone who helped when times were hard. The next morning, I took the motel's dusty computer and began searching. It took me hours. I had to pay for extra time on the machine, but I found him. Marvin Goldstein, retired estate attorney, still listed under a private firm in Dallas. I couldn't bring myself to call. My hands shook too much, so I wrote him a letter. A real letter. Handwritten on lined paper from a motel notepad. I told him my name, my mother's name, and that I had questions, big ones. I asked if he could help me understand a part of her life that had always been hidden. 2 weeks later, my motel phone rang. "This is Marvin Goldstein," the voice said. "Is this Evelyn Hartman?" "Yes," I said, barely above a whisper. "I always wondered if you'd reach out one day," he said. "There's something you need to see." The next morning, I packed my suitcase and took a Greyhound to Dallas. I wasn't sure what I'd find. I was still afraid it might all be a mistake or worse, a scam. But when I stepped into Mr. Goldstein's quiet office filled with old books, polished wood, and silence heavy with time, I knew this was real. He didn't smile. He simply handed me a sealed envelope and said, "This is from Harold James Sterling. He wanted you to have it." The envelope was old, yellowed at the corners, sealed with care. Written on the front in elegant handwriting were the words, "To my daughter, Evelyn Louise." My hands trembled as I opened it. I had to read the first paragraph 3 times before I could keep going. He admitted everything. The affair, the regrets, the shame of living a double life, and then the line that made me drop the page onto my lap. "In the event of my death, I have insured a portion of my personal, untraceable assets will be delivered to you by Mr. Goldstein. You are my daughter. Though I lacked the courage to claim you in life, I claim you now in death." I cried. Not from sadness, not entirely from joy either. It was something else, recognition. I had spent my life thinking I was invisible, that my story didn't matter. And suddenly, I was someone. I wasn't just the widow cast aside with 2 suitcases. I was the daughter of Harold James Sterling, a man with a name that could change the course of a legacy. Marvin handed me a folder. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, a modest but stable investment portfolio. A figure was circled at the bottom. Just over $1 million. I looked up at him, blinking. "Is this real?" He nodded slowly. "It's always been yours. Your mother made sure of that. And he did too, in the only way he knew how." That night, back in the motel, I didn't sleep. But I didn't cry either. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a soft smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. They thought they broke me. They thought they threw me away. But they had no idea. I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. I didn't return to Austin right away. I needed time. Time to think, to breathe, to figure out who I was now. I wandered the streets of Dallas like a ghost in reverse, becoming more visible with each passing day. I read books on investing. I watched videos on property law, not because I wanted to be rich, but because I never wanted to be powerless again. And then one night I saw it, a listing, a distressed property for sale in East Austin. It was the apartment building Lauren and Zach lived in. I stared at the screen for a long time. The listing was simple: distressed multi-unit property, owner defaulting on taxes, auction in 2 weeks. But it wasn't just any property. It was their building, the one where Lauren and Zach had pushed me out. My heart pounded in my chest, but not with fear, with clarity. This wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about taking back the space where I had been discarded, about planting my name, quietly and legally, into the foundation they believed belonged to them. I called Mr. Goldstein the next morning. Together we formed an Mel Ventures. ML stood for Margaret Louise, my mother's name and mine intertwined. No one would trace it back to me, not Lauren, not Zach. We filed the paperwork. We placed the bid. 2 weeks later, the auction ended. ML Ventures was now the legal heir of the building at 1213 Hawthorne Street, every unit, every box, every lease, including theirs. I didn't show up in person. I didn't need to. My name was on the deed. That was enough. A month later, formal notifications were mailed to all tenants. Lease terms were under review. Rents would be reassessed based on updated market value. For Lauren and Zach's unit, the new amount was 3 times what they had been paying, plus late fees that had been ignored. I could imagine the look on Zach's face when he opened that envelope. I didn't have to see it. I felt it in my bones. 2 days after the letters went out, Lauren called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was uncertain, shaky. "Hi, Mom. I don't know if you heard, but something weird's happening with our building. Our rent just tripled. Jax is losing it. I don't know what's going on. Can we talk?" I didn't return the call. Because this wasn't about vengeance. It was about gravity. And consequences have a way of pulling people back down to earth. I drove by the building one night, just once. Their windows were lit. I saw shadows moving. Zach pacing. Lauren standing still. Part of me hurt. Part of me wanted to knock on the door. But a bigger part of me whispered, not yet. Let them sit in the silence they gave me. 3 weeks passed. Lauren's voicemails came every few days. Sometimes she'd start with "Hi, Mom," sometimes just "It's me." Her voice always sounded tired, unsure, like someone standing outside a locked door, not sure if they should knock again. I never responded. Not out of cruelty, but because silence was the only thing she had left me with that night at the dinner table. And now, she needed to sit with it. Then one evening, just before sunset, my intercom buzzed. "This is Lauren Harmon. I think my mom lives here." My heart paused. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her name flicker across the screen. Then slowly, I pressed the door release. 10 minutes later, she knocked softly. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a tote bag like it was the only thing keeping her together. Her eyes were red, her face pale, her shirt wrinkled like she hadn't slept. So we stared at each other in silence. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, unsure if she was welcome. I made tea chamomile, just like I used to when she was little and had trouble sleeping. She sat on the edge of the couch, not touching anything. "I don't know where to start," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zach's angry. All the time. He blames the rent. Blames me. Blames the dog next door." Still, I said nothing. She looked down at her hands. "I thought we were helping you when we asked you to leave," Zach said. "You'd never go unless we pushed. And I hate that I let him." I took a sip of my tea, calm, grounded. "I miss you," she whispered, "but I don't know how to fix it." So I studied her face. She wasn't asking for money or help, just a place to sit, just to be near me again. So I gave her the only thing I could, silence. Not punishment, not forgiveness, just space. When she stood to leave, she reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything." I didn't say it back. I just held her hand for a second longer than she expected. She pulled away first. And then she left. A week later, the building's management office sent out an announcement. "Tenant meeting scheduled, upcoming renovations, mandatory attendance." I knew Zach would show up. He was the kind of man who needed control, and nothing made him more unhinged than not knowing who to blame. The meeting was set in the community room, neutral ground. No one knew what was coming. I arrived early, dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and dark jeans, hair softly curled, glasses perched low on my nose. I looked nothing like the woman who once stood trembling in their kitchen, holding a half-finished pot pie. Tenants trickled in, some nodding politely, others avoiding eye contact. Then came Zach storming in like he owned the floor beneath his feet. Lauren followed, a step behind, eyes low, shoulders tense. He didn't look around, just marched up to the property manager and barked, "I want to know who owns this place. This is a scam." The manager kept his voice steady. "All questions will be addressed during the presentation." Zach scoffed. Lauren didn't say a word. The presentation began: new lighting, updated mailboxes, hallway repairs. Then the manager paused. "We'd like to thank ML Ventures for their investment in the building and commitment to the tenant community. The owner is present today if anyone has questions." I stood. The room fell completely silent. Zach turned. His face twisted, like the floor had dropped from under him. Lauren froze. I stepped forward slowly, calmly. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Evelyn Hartman. I'm the owner of this building." You could have heard a pin drop. Zach's chair scraped back loudly as he stood, furious. This is a joke, right? You planned this, you set this up." I met his eyes, steady, no games, just business. "You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us." "I raised everyone's rent," I said, my voice calm, "and I've reinvested every dollar back into the building. Security, maintenance, fairness. Zach looked ready to explode, but Lauren stepped between us. Stop, she said. Firm? Clear? He turned to her, stunned. What did you just say? I said stop, she repeated. She's not your enemy, you are. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. Lauren came to my apartment 4 days later. This time she wasn't empty-handed. In her arms was something wrapped in cloth, something she held like it meant everything. When she unwrapped it on my coffee table, my breath caught. It was my mother's diary. I found it in my closet, she said. From the last time I visited you. You must have left it behind. Her voice shook. I read it. I know I shouldn't have, but I recognized her handwriting. I wasn't trying to pry, I was just trying to make sense of things. She sat down slowly. I didn't know. About Harold Sterling. About the money. The trust. Any of it. I didn't know either, I said softly. Not until I had nothing else to lose. Her eyes welled with tears. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at her. For the first time, she didn't look away. Because I didn't think I mattered enough to be heard. Lauren clenched her hands in her lap. I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could do what I did. I keep asking myself that. You didn't become her all at once, I said gently. It's small choices, looking away, choosing peace over truth. She nodded slowly. I left him, she whispered. I blinked. He tried to go through my bag again, my laptop, my phone. I told him no. He screamed. Packed a bag. I changed the locks the next day. I stared at her in silence. I don't know who I am without him, she said, but I want to find out. We sat together for a long time. Then she looked at the diary again. You didn't deserve what I did, what we did. I can't undo it, but I want to try. I sat beside her. You see me now, I said. That changes everything. That night, after she left, I made a decision. I sold the building, quietly. No announcement, just paperwork, signatures, and the weight of 3 years finally lifting. Half the proceeds went to a shelter for women in crisis, named after my mother, the Eliza Hartman House. The other half bought me a small house in Cedar Grove, just down the road from where I raised Lauren. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't just survive my story. I lived it. On